Good afternoon, all. It is just a little bit after 2 o'clock, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Just very quick introduction. My name is Beth. I'm a dietitian, diabetes educator with Gem Care. So looking forward to talking with y'all here today in regards to a topic that's near and dear to my heart personally. The discussion of food and how it affects the blood sugars. There's so many myths and things out there, and sometimes we like to make it more complicated than it needs to be. So hopefully this will help clear up a few of those things for you there. So anyway, just kind of a quick introduction about myself. I have been a dietitian I am celebrating my 20th year this month. So August 5th is my 20th anniversary. So yeah, it's been a while. I've seen a lot of different things happen and change in regards to nutrition and diabetes over the years, but some of the basics are still there and they work well. And I think if we go back to them, sometimes it just kind of it works to make things a little less complicated for everybody. So hopefully, whether you are newly diagnosed, living with diabetes for years, or just trying to understand it better, this topic will help you a little bit here. So I am going to move forward, hopefully. Just, kind of a quick overview of what we are going to discuss today, just that connection between nutrition and diabetes. It is a big part of diabetes management for sure. So, usually where we start, if somebody is newly diagnosed, we talk about nutrition and exercise first. It is the first line of defense of treatment in most cases there. So, kind of that nutrition connection there. Just making it a little bit easier, like what are the hidden sources of sugar? Where can you find them? What should you look for? Maybe reading that food label a little bit more or a little differently. So when we look at it in regards to diabetes management, there are certain things we're looking for. We don't have to look at everything on the label to get a good understanding of what's going on and what we need and what we don't need. And then hopefully some practical tips on how to eat. Eating shouldn't be complicated. It's part of our lives. It's part of our socialization. It's part of our celebrations. So, food is just, something we all do every day. From the moment a baby is born, we're worried about their nutrition, what they're going to eat, how they're going to eat, what we're going to do to make it easier for them until, those last days of life when we're, questioning somebody's nutrition care. So hopefully, we'll get some, start to understand that food is not the enemy. What can we do to, just make it a little bit easier? Their kind of nutrition again in diabetes, what makes it so confusing? There's lots of conflicting information out there. There's lots of sources of information, probably way more than I even know about. We have our friends, our family, our physicians, our healthcare providers. We have the internet, we have Google, we have every social media platform that you can think of. Everybody and anybody is an expert. If it works for one, they want to share it with others and, try to get everybody on the same bandwagon. So, gets very confusing, and if you have multiple health conditions going on, if you have diabetes and you have heart disease or diabetes and high blood pressure, putting all those parts together can feel overwhelming to the point of, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want to. So, that conflicting information can be super confusing. So what advice should you follow? Low carb, keto, fruit is bad, whatever the nutrition headline is. And believe me, they will change. And we've all watched them change over the years. That fear of eating the wrong thing. Fruit's bad, white bread's bad, pasta's bad, beans are bad, so just, kind of getting over that fear, doing what's right for you. Culturally, we all eat a little bit differently. So finding those things that, will work for you on a daily basis is the key. What is true. Food, like I said, food's not the enemy. Kind of learning how to understand how certain foods affect your blood sugar is going to be key there. We have lots of, we can test our blood sugar with a glucometer. We have continuous glucose monitors. A lot of those things will help us decide which foods work better for us. If we can find good nutrition support, it's going to make that management of the diabetes easier. It's going to make your glucose readings better, your blood sugar numbers better. It's going to give you more energy. You're going to feel, you're not going to be avoiding certain food groups, so your body's not going to feel depleted. Hopefully better blood sugar control, better, just feeling better, making eating less complicated will lead to fewer complications for you also. And, just on a daily basis, you'll feel good. Life is complicated enough. We don't have to feel bad on top of it. The truth about sugar. So yes, kind of a catch-all. Sugar isn't necessarily bad. Glucose is the fuel of your body and brain. So in its simplest form, glucose is the fuel of your body, and the insulin that is released by your pancreas opens the cell, lets the glucose in, and allows that glucose to produce energy to let your brain and your body run. So without glucose, your brain's not running, then your body's not running. It's a vicious cycle there. So we have to learn that glucose, sugar, isn't necessarily bad. It is just how we do it, how much we do, how it's absorbed, which sugars work better for us, how much sugar is in certain foods. Natural sugars, fruit and dairy, every day I feel like I hear somebody say, bananas are bad or oranges are bad, or, but yet they'll eat a donut. So it's just like kind of learning where the different sugars come from, which ones spike your blood sugars the quickest, and knowing the difference to help you make smarter food choices. So, again, sugar in its simplest form, we have, glucose and fructose are the preferred sugars of the body. They go directly into the bloodstream, raise the blood sugars up very quickly. So those are the ones we need to be most cognizant of, most aware of, and then, making sure that we're not overdoing it when we're having them there. Sorry about that. I think my slides are going. I must have hit something there. So how sugar shows up in foods. The food label can be your friend. So if you have access to it, make sure you're taking a look at it and seeing, what's in there. Any word that ends in OSE is some kind of sugar. So it's, can be called lots of different things. It can be listed as corn syrup. It can be listed as dextrose, maltose, cane sugar, agave nectar. It's hidden in lots of different things. I had, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but I have a box of Cheerios, the honey oat crunch Cheerios, and I looked just on here for the sugar sources. So on here it is sugar, corn syrup, raspberry puree, blueberry puree, strawberry puree, and fruit juice. So just 6 different ways that sugar, besides saying sugar, is listed just on that particular box. So being a label guru and just, scanning through those ingredients, like home in on the OSE words first, and then anything that has the word juice or malt, agave, those, just different ways that we can name that sugar there. Hidden sources, like that cereal is a great example. It sounds healthy, and Cheerios, I'm not promoting or demoting cereal in any way, shape, or form, but, basic Cheerios are a lot different than some of these, flavored Cheerios that you have out there now. Also be aware of products that, and again, this feels like it makes it more complicated, but, things that say low fat or heart healthy. A lot of times the fats are taken out, but we add sugar and salt or other, flavorings to make up for that taste there. So, just make sure that if a product is labeled, to contain low fat, heart healthy, often it does have some added sugars in it. So it may not, the regular product often is your best benefit there. So carbs and blood sugar, like I said, glucose is the fuel of your body here. So that sugar is that fuel that keeps you going there. So, carbs, even with diabetes, can be important. You can't avoid all of them all the time. The key is going to be to choose the right kind of carbs. So things like your whole grains, so beans, they have high fiber content, which we'll get into a little bit there. Fruits, especially whole fruits. There's a big difference between eating an orange and drinking a glass of orange juice. If somebody in the world of diabetes, if you have a low blood sugar, often it's recommended that you'll drink, a half a cup or 4 ounces of juice just to kind of get that blood sugar going a little bit there, kind of get it up, because that fluid is going to be absorbed very quickly and raise the blood sugar very quickly so that you don't have that low blood sugar. If I eat an orange, I have to peel it. I have to, take off a section. I have to chew it. My body has to digest it. My blood sugar is not going to go up as quickly there. So just be aware that, the fruit, yes, the fruit is going to raise your blood sugar, but the fiber content, the vitamins and minerals and things are going to help that blood sugar rise to be slower and more steady. Things refined carbs. So this is where, like white bread will get, kind of that bad rap. So it tends to be very refined. All the fiber is kind of stripped away. So when you eat it, it just digests very quickly and up goes the blood sugar very quickly there. So kind of making sure that we choose carbs, such as breads and things that have a high fiber content. So I'll show you on the label where to look for and get that fiber piece so that you are not having those big spikes in your blood sugars there. When we pair carbs with fat and protein, that kind of helps stabilize the blood sugar a little bit for you there. So if I eat, a piece of cheese and then, have a piece of bread, or if I have a grilled cheese where I have a piece of bread with a little bit of butter on it, because that butter is going to add a little bit of fat, that's going to have a whole lot different effect on my blood sugar than if I just eat that piece of bread all by itself. So kind of thinking about that pairing of foods that contain carbohydrate with other sources of protein and fat there. And then just kind of learning the difference of which foods, have a combination of nutrients in it there, or at least those macronutrients. Some common food myths that, just kind of really need to be dispelled a little bit here. So that fruit is bad for diabetes. Fruit offers us lots of good vitamins and minerals, lots of antioxidants. If we think about that Mediterranean diet approach, it has, fruits in it. We can't eat them unending, but things like berries, apples, some citrus actually have high levels of fiber in them. They digest very slowly, and they will tend not to raise your blood sugars very quickly. That will vary from individual to individual, so kind of looking, kind of monitoring your own blood sugars to see what happens there. But a banana gets a bad rap, I think, because it can be a very concentrated source of sugar. So a 4 to 5 inch piece of banana, which is usually a half a banana, will contain about 15 grams of carbohydrate, which is usually the amount that will start to raise the blood sugar a little bit, compared to a cup of strawberries. So if I eat a cup of strawberries versus a half a banana, I'm getting about the same amount of carb, but if I, eat the whole banana, I'm doubling that carb amount there. So that could be the effect on the blood sugar more than the fruit choice itself. So the quantity more than, the quantity of the fruit is the big key there. Second myth is you have to cut out all carbs. So often, people even with long-standing diabetes or people that are just diagnosed think, oh, if I just cut all the carbohydrates out, then my blood sugars will be fine. And often they will lower their blood sugars by cutting carbohydrates out initially, especially because we overdo it with a lot of the carbohydrate food. So again, just kind of working on that balance and making sure that you understand that you can have them, but you want to pair them with other foods and you want to watch out how much you're having there. Another myth that you hear often is sugar-free means healthy. So just, again, sugar-free options can be great in some respects. So if somebody is newly diagnosed with diabetes and they're drinking, 2 cans of Pepsi a day, each can of Pepsi has got about 10 teaspoons of sugar. If I drink 2 cans, I'm getting 20 teaspoons of sugar. If I replace that with 2 Diet Pepsis, it's going to make a difference. I've cut out 20 teaspoons of sugar in my diet. Is it the best choice? Maybe, maybe not. There's, lots of different ways to look at that. But we don't want to overdo the artificial sweeteners necessarily either. And anybody that, kind of switches, not that, and the artificial sweeteners are in lots of foods, not just beverages, but I think we think about it initially in those beverage sources. Just always remember that the artificial sweeteners are 200 plus times sweeter than the actual sugar itself. So just be aware if have, they can make you crave sweets in some cases. Some of us are, everybody's built a little bit differently, but some of those artificial sweeteners can really, they taste so sweet that once you have them, you're often thinking like, oh gosh, I want something else. So just make sure they're not making you crave more sweet. So when it comes to the artificial sweeteners and the beverage choices, do try to do beverages that don't do artificially sweetened beverages all the time. Do try to back it up with some water. There's lots of sparkling waters and beverage alternatives out there that don't have artificial sweeteners in them. It's okay to, in most cases, unless the sweeteners bother you in some other way, it's okay to have them. Just don't overdo it. So here's kind of that label reading 101. And let's, kind of focus in really in regards to diabetes. What am I looking for on this label or any label? Nutrition labels are all set up pretty much the same. They're standardized. So when you look at the label, hopefully you can see my pointer here. Any product that you get, if you flip it over, you're looking for the nutrition facts. First thing you want to do is home in on this serving size here. So in this case, whatever this product may be, the serving size is 3 ounces. So what is 3 ounces? Good question. If you have a food scale, you can figure that out. If you don't have a food scale, in this case, there's 2 servings in a container, then you would know that half of this package is going to be that 3 ounces for you. I always feel like this little, in parentheses, after the serving size, there is usually a gram measure. Just remember, this does nothing to do with the carbohydrates. This is the weight of the product. So this 3 ounces weighs 85 grams. So in most places beyond the United States, they're using the metric system for weight. So they're, 85, if I weigh 3 ounces and convert it to grams, it should weigh 85 grams. So nothing to do with carbs, helps you with the serving size, but, just remember that that is not telling you how many grams of carbohydrate are in that serving size. So I know that gets a little bit confusing there, but just, kind of home in there. It might be, the serving size might say a half a cup. It might say 1 cup. I'm looking at this box of Cheerios and the serving size is 1 cup or 54 grams. So I can either use a 1 cup measure and measure it out, or I can put it on a food scale and weigh 54 grams to get that serving size. The next thing that you may want to look at on the label is the added sugars. So this particular label here can be what had happened, I think, with this picture, unfortunately, I just noticed this a few minutes ago, is the total carbohydrate is what we really want to see here, but the magnifying glass kind of is homing in on the cholesterol, I believe, which is the 30 milligrams. So we can't actually see the total grams of carbohydrate here. But if I were looking at this label, I would want to look at the serving size first, so the 3 ounces, and then the total grams of carbohydrate. So let's say that total grams of carbohydrate there is 30 grams versus this 30 milligrams here, because the carbs aren't going to be in milligrams. So 30 grams of carbohydrate in that particular serving. That is the amount that's going to impact your blood sugar. The dietary fiber, the higher fiber slows digestion. We don't completely absorb fiber. So the more fiber in a product, the slower the rise in the blood sugar. So this dietary fiber here is 0. So this fiber is not helping me in this respect here. if you can, especially when it comes to foods like with that have grains in the, like your whole grains, your breads and things like that, try to look for foods that have 3 or more grams of fiber per serving. That is going to have a little bit of an impact on how they digest and how it affects the blood sugar. So we've talked about the total carbs. We've talked about we haven't talked about the added sugars yet, but we have talked about the fiber there. So that fiber slows the digestion, supports the blood sugar. This added sugar, so this is going to be, you're going to see total carbs, fiber. Under that, you're going to see sugars. Sometimes it'll say added sugars there. 5 grams. Every 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon of sugar. So this particular product, whatever it may be, has 5 grams of sugar, so a little over a teaspoon of added sugar there. So single digits usually work out pretty good when it comes to sugar. If you're under 10, yeah, it's in there. You want to be aware if you're sticking to the serving size, probably, we can probably manage this. But if once these sugars get into double digits, I mean, you're talking 2+ teaspoons of added sugar into some of these products here. So per serving, if you're eating multiple servings, that really can add up very quickly. So just make sure that you are, kind of first looking at the total carb, then you're looking at the fiber. So we can manage the carb. We want to make sure there's some added fiber there in most cases, and we want to make sure there's not too much added sugar in there. So single digits for sugar, higher numbers for fiber if possible there. Again, checking the serving size, make sure, like if I pick up this package, if I'm eating the whole package, all these numbers I need to double. So just make sure you're being aware of the serving size there. Just like I said, being label savvy, that will help you make an informed decision. There's lots of apps out there now too that we can like scan a label or scan a barcode on a package, and it will give us the pros and cons, and then often recommend other products there that can be, used instead with the yogurt, for example. Like lots of yogurts have tons of added sugar in them now. So you can pick a yogurt that is high in protein, doesn't have the added sugar in it, and in most cases they're not going to have much fiber, but you can personally add. If I get plain yogurt that has no added sugar, it just has the naturally occurring sugar from the lactose, and I add a couple berries to it, I can add fiber, add some nutrition to it by getting, the extra antioxidants in there. And I have cut back on the simple added sugar that's in there. So we'll talk about a few strategies to keep those food choices going the right direction there. Focus on what you can eat. We always think about what we can have. Oh, I can't have this, I can't have that. But what can you have? Foods that don't necessarily, honestly, these are probably the things that should be the basis of our nutrition, but the foods that don't affect the blood sugars directly or quickly. Any non-starchy vegetable. So the big three that we want to make sure that we are thinking of as a starch versus a vegetable are corn, peas, potatoes are the most common ones. Yes, there's a few other in there, but those are the big ones. They are going to have a higher starch content, so we want to monitor those portion sizes a little more closely. When it comes to protein sources, whether meat, egg, cheese are our big players there. We want to choose the leanest ones, because if we think about diabetes and eating, we're usually thinking of a triad of, we want doesn't have to be no fat. We want to choose healthier fats, and your meat sources the ones that have a higher content of fat will tend to be ones that have more saturated fat in them. So we want to choose the leaner protein sources. If I'm having any kind of poultry, so chicken or turkey, trying to remove the skin as much as possible there. If I'm having beef, I want to try to choose the leaner cuts, if you're getting hamburger, try to get at least, like a 90% versus 90% lean versus 10% fat. The 80/20 is going to have a lot more fat in it there. So we want to try to choose the foods that have a little bit of a lower fat content in them when it comes to the proteins. Same thing with your dairy. Do you have to go fat free? Absolutely not. But you want to try to choose things that have a little bit less fat in them. But meat, egg, cheese, those are going to be your big protein sources there. So you want to try, they tend not to have much carbohydrate in them. They tend to have mostly protein and a little bit of fat. So trying to choose the ones that work into your meal plan best. Healthy fats. So we do want to include, fat's good. We have learned that a very low fat diet isn't necessarily good for our brain. So you don't have to avoid, foods that got a bad rap, years ago, we, included our diet now. So think about those plant-based fats. So things like olive oil and avocado, nuts, they tend to be very satisfying. They offer us some good, omega-3 fats that, kind of, again, help with brain health, help keep us full, feeling full longer, help keep the blood sugars a little bit more steady. There is lots of research behind a high fat meal. If you eat a high fat, high carb meal, your blood sugars are going to linger high longer because not only do you have the effect of the carbs, you also have the effect of the fat taking a long time to digest. I think fettuccine Alfredo is always the one that comes to my mind there. It's like it's very high fat, high carb. You'll eat it, blood sugars will go up and they'll linger high for a while because it tends to take a long time for the body to break everything down, especially that fat content. Your high fiber carbs. So you can have, do have them, things like lentils and beans, making those substitutions for some of the very quick digesting carbs will help you keep those blood sugars steady, keep the energy steady. You won't have that crash. You'll get a nice slow rise in your blood sugars and hopefully they'll kind of fall quickly, not quickly, they'll kind of come down nice and easily for you. So again, focus on what you can eat. Non-starchy vegetables, lean proteins, healthy fats, high fiber carbs. Meal planning strategies, the plate method. It's probably the easiest way. When we feed children, we tend to do this from the beginning. We give them the little divided plates and we try to give them, 3 different things. So, making sure that in one of those smaller compartments, you are putting a lean protein. So that tends to be about the size of the palm of your hand without your fingers, about the thickness of your thumb. All of us have different size hands. I am 5'2". If I put a piece of protein in my hand and then measure it using those standards, it usually comes out to about 3 ounces. So really using the palm of your hand for your protein source in most cases can work out very well. Your hand's with you when you go out to eat. You can hover it over your portion. If it's taking up your whole hand, cut it in half, take half of it home, have it later on. But that quarter of your plate being your lean protein usually works out pretty well. Half of your plate being those non-starchy vegetables. So, filling up that half a plate with your non-starchy vegetables. I always, I didn't have any of the picnic plates, but I just took a paper plate, half of it your veggies, a quarter of it your protein. That other quarter can be your starchy source. So, if you want a potato or a sweet potato, or if you wanted a few French fries or something like that, it's that small portion that, we have to learn is appropriate in most cases. So half your plate, half plate non-starchy vegetables, quarter plate your lean protein, a quarter plate your non-starchy vegetable there. So, or your starchy food, I'm sorry there. So just, kind of using that in your brain when you go out to eat, when you're making your meals at home, can make it very easy to balance those meals out. Always pair your carbs with a protein or fat to keep them steady. So again, I feel like an apple with peanut butter is always a big one that, we suggest. So just a little, the peanut butter is easy. You just kind of smear a little bit on or use a little bit as a dip. Toast and eggs. I have an egg or two. I have one piece of toast with it. I don't have to have three. I just need a little bit of carb with it there. Plan ahead, keep some things on hand. Take advantage of foods that are quick and easy to prepare. You have, frozen veggies and fruits, frozen veggies and fruits now. You can keep in your freezer, just take out what you need or steam them. There's lots of quick, easy prep things that you can do to balance your meals out quickly. I know at the end of the day, I don't want to, get a head of cauliflower out and wash it and chop it. And, but I can take out a bag of frozen cauliflower and steam it or, roast it, find another way to prepare it and make it easy and quick. Treats and special occasions, again, being mindful is the key. Yes, of course you can enjoy them, but don't have them, you know, in large quantities. You don't want to have them every single day. If you know something is coming up, maybe you skip the starch with your meal. Like if it's my birthday, I'm having a piece of cake. So maybe I have, grilled chicken and veggies, and I have my cake for dessert afterwards there. Just I can take a walk afterwards. I can, be a little more mindful earlier in the day. You don't want to save all your carbs necessarily for one time of the day, but, have a smaller piece, just be aware of how much you're having. If you look at the research, especially when it comes to desserts, the first three bites is where all the satisfaction comes from. So pick something you love, enjoy it, save half for later, just try to, spread it out a little bit so that you're not doing too much all at once to, influence that blood sugar very quickly there. Whoops, sorry about that. What can like I said, don't save up by skipping meals. Depending on the kind of medications you're on, where your diabetes is at, there's all, you could be a very well controlled diabetic, skip a meal and it's not a big deal. Things when we're talking about insulin, things like that, we do want to be more mindful and be consistent with our eating to avoid those highs and lows that will often make you feel pretty darn bad sometimes there. Kind of remember that mindset. Eat your treats slowly, stay present, put them on a plate, sit down, eat them, enjoy them. If they're mediocre, maybe you pass on it and save it for something good. Just remember that balance is the key there. Everything works in somewhere. If you struggle to fit things in that you really enjoy, then do you can talk with a dietitian, you can talk with a healthcare provider, and often can work out a way to make that work for you. Um, Using tools to understand a little bit better, the continuous glucose monitor. It's crazy. I think I told you at the beginning, I've been practicing for 20 years. Well, glucose monitors were very elusive at that point in time. There were a couple pumps that had them, and that's about it. Now, they're used in, athletes use them, people without diabetes, just to see the effects of food on your blood sugars and how they are, you know, how you it's just surprising how different things you eat can digest differently from person to person. So, take advantage. If that technology is there for you, please take advantage. We have, if somebody is diagnosed with diabetes, often you can get a script for a continuous glucose monitor. There are over-the-counter glucose monitors available now. Both Dexcom and Libre make continuous glucose monitors that you can get without a prescription. So they are not appropriate for people that are using insulin and some diabetes medications, but even somebody without diabetes can use that glucose monitor to help learn about their blood sugars a little bit more. Using the journaling apps or, keeping a journal yourself and, just seeing what you're eating and how your blood sugars are responding to it. Can kind of those just that information itself, by you keeping a food journal and testing blood sugar, whether it's with a continuous glucose monitor or with a glucometer, before you eat and after you eat, can help someone like myself help you make better choices when it comes to food or how we can do it a little bit differently. So usually there is an answer or a solution to what you want to do or how to do it to keep those blood sugars in range there. So hopefully taking advantage of some of those tools that are available to you. Realistic goals, set some very realistic goals for yourself. Start with small. You don't have to do everything all at once. My suggestion often is, especially if somebody is newly diagnosed and overwhelmed, or all of a sudden blood sugars are out of control and we don't know why, we start with something small, but maybe one meal. Like we change your breakfast and do it a little bit differently, or you do that beverage swap. If you're drinking a beverage with sugar, you swap it for water or a sugar-free beverage. We add a vegetable to a meal that will offer more fiber. Just adding that vegetable is going to give you a great fiber source, so that it's going to help you, again, keep those blood sugars a little bit more steady. Kind of some key takeaways. Again, sugar's not the villain, carbs are not the villain. We just need to learn to use them more appropriately in most cases. Our diet tends to have lots of carbs there. Just remember, balance can be it can be achieved. You can do it. Restrictive diets don't last when you think about, oh, I'm going to do intermittent fasting, I'm going to do keto. You can try anything, but it's like, okay, how long can I do it? Is it realistic, for me never to eat a carbohydrate again? If it is, then we can kind of work through that. And, if you feel better and it works well for you, okay. But if it doesn't, then it's like, okay, what can we do more reasonably that you can do day to day? Again, we usually have to think about nutrition as, what can I do long term? What fits into your lifestyle? And that may change at different points in your life, and different situations. So we got to find that combination that works well for you, that doesn't make it hard and gives you good results there. Read the labels. Labels give you lots of information. You will, like I said, look for those hidden sources of sugar. Be mindful of the serving size. Try to pick the foods in regards to diabetes that have the higher fiber content and the lower sugar content. Lastly, listen to your body. We're all different. So finding the combination that works for you. Just because it works for, Uncle Joe or my next door neighbor doesn't mean it's going to work for me necessarily. So don't discount listening to yourself and how you feel when you feel better. Most of us will have a place where we notice a big difference, and so you want to choose those things that are most appropriate for you. So I thank you for your time here today. I'll open it up to some questions in the chat here if you have any. The couple sources for you. If you have a question, we have the Ask the RD at it's myehcs.com. You can pop a question in there, and one of us will get back to you. You can reach out to Edwards Healthcare Services, and then their number is on there also. So any questions, concerns you have, please feel free to reach out. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat there, and I am happy to answer them for you. I'm going to pick up one thing. Somebody had asked what is a good suggestion for a high fiber snack that would not affect the blood sugars too much. So if anybody has any, please, feel free you can put the answer in the chat there, or just kind of a couple suggestions off the top of my head is you can do things like veggies and hummus. If the thought of something like raw veggies kind of gets you like, you can always you can steam them a little bit, and then put them in the refrigerator so that kind of softens them up a little bit. Sometimes can even change the flavor. And then the hummus makes a great dip there. I always think about using Greek yogurt. Also, if you get the plain Greek yogurt, you can flavor it with anything. So if you buy even the packet of ranch dip, or they make that powdered ranch, if that's a dressing or a flavor you like, you can mix it in there and then use that as a dip. And then the advantage of the Greek yogurt there is you're getting some calcium, you are getting some protein, so you're getting some good nutrition bang there, and then you are getting some fiber and some nutrients from the vegetables also. So that can kind of give you a little a whammy of both there. We can get the fiber and the a little bit of calcium, a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat if we use a yogurt that has a little bit of fat in it there too. So many things. There's a lot of whole wheat kind of crackers out there. So you can do whole wheat crackers with, you can put some avocado on them. You can make an avocado toast. So you can, a slice of high fiber bread or a thin sliced bread. And then, you can put an egg on there and a little avocado, just, something real easy. Again, that's going to be filling. It's going to stick with you. When you say snack, I always think, okay, are you really hungry? Because if you really are, then okay, we need to get something that's going to fill you up and stay with you for a little bit. Or, if you are kind of, just kind of looking for something there, we don't want to consume too many calories and, too many carbs so that we don't raise the blood sugar up there. I am going to go. Any other questions or today? Somebody asked for a sweet snack, like something sweet, like fruit with whipped topping. I Again, something like Cool Whip or Ready Whip doesn't really have any nutritional value to it, but it can give you that little bit of sweet without much carb there. It also works great like on a graham cracker, and then stick it in the freezer for a few minutes. It kind of almost acts as an ice cream if you're just looking for something sweet and kind of, that doesn't impact your blood sugars too much there. So that can do it for you. Just again, somebody asked about meal planning. I always say start with the plate method. It's the easiest. Most of us can kind of think about that and find some veggies that you like. So, well, hopefully that helps a little bit. I am going to go ahead and wrap up here today, as long as there are no other questions. Thank you for your time, much appreciated. And do reach out to either the Ask the RD or Edwards Healthcare Services with any other questions or concerns that you may have. All right, much appreciated. Thank you.